After World War II, civil rights activism focused mainly on fighting Jim Crow segregation. Because education was seen as essential to improving the lives of Black Americans, the NAACP made ending segregation in schools its top priority. In order to understand the NAACP's strategy for fighting school segregation, it would be helpful to review how segregation became legal in the first place. In 1896, some 50 years before World War II ended, a man named Homer Plessy filed a lawsuit challenging segregation on trains in New Orleans. His argument was that separating Black passengers branded them as inferior. But the Supreme Court in 1896 did not agree. They said that separation did not necessarily demean Black people, as long as the separate facility was equal. This established the separate but equal doctrine, which was used to justify all types of segregation. African Americans knew better, of course. They knew they were being insulted, and they knew that the separate options they were offered would never be truly equal to those afforded to whites. On average, white schools received 4 times the government funding as schools for Black children. Separate would never be equal, but nothing would change until the Supreme Court changed its mind. So the NAACP hired a lawyer to persuade them. His name was Thurgood Marshall. The plan was to chip away at the separate but equal doctrine by arguing cases against schools that provided blatantly unequal options for Black students. Many of the first cases Marshall won were against colleges, such as the University of Missouri, which rejected Black applicant Lloyd Gaines, but offered to pay for him to attend school in a different state. Marshall argued that a school in another state was not equal to a school in Missouri, and the Supreme Court agreed with him, ruling that Missouri would have to either integrate or create a separate state university within its borders. In another case, the University of Texas created a separate law school for Black students, but as it was located in the basement, Thurgood Marshall was able to convince the Supreme Court that it did not meet the standard of separate but equal. Finally, in 1954, Marshall won a major landmark case known as Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, which we usually call Brown versus the Board for short. This case was different because it was filed against a public school district, not a university, and it had the power to impact all school children throughout the country. Chief Justice Earl Warren delivered the court's unanimous decision that separate educational access was harmful to Black students and therefore unconstitutional. At last, the separate but equal doctrine, at least with regard to education, had been overturned. It was a moment of celebration, as the promise of true equality seemed closer at hand.